What happens when a decorated Navy SEAL is falsely accused by a corrupt police officer? Michelle Moore, a retired lieutenant commander, finds herself in a fight for justice after a routine traffic stop turns into a nightmare. But when the truth comes out, no one will see it coming. Will Michelle's past be her greatest weapon, or will the system fail her again? The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the quiet streets of the small town. Michelle Moore, a retired Navy SEAL with a distinguished 20-year career, was driving home after giving a motivational speech at a local military base. Her dark brown skin glowed under the fading light, and her neatly braided hair rested on her shoulders. She wore a crisp white blouse and black slacks, a deliberate choice to exude professionalism even in her civilian life. Her sharp eyes scanned the road ahead, her posture straight and confident, a habit ingrained from years of military discipline. As she approached a quiet intersection, the flashing lights of a police cruiser appeared in her rearview mirror. Michelle frowned but remained calm. She signaled and pulled over to the side of the road, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. She had been through enough traffic stops to know the drill, but something about this one felt different. Officer Bradley Turner stepped out of his cruiser, his tall frame casting a long shadow over her car. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming under the streetlights. He approached her window with a swagger that made Michelle's instincts kick in. She rolled down the window, her expression neutral but alert. "License and registration," Turner said, his tone clipped and devoid of warmth. Michelle handed him the documents without a word, her eyes meeting his briefly. There was a flicker of something in his gaze, discomfort, maybe even disdain, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. "No, officer," Michelle replied evenly. "I wasn't aware I was doing anything wrong." Turner narrowed his eyes. "You were swerving back there. Have you been drinking?" Michelle's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice calm. "I haven't had a drop of alcohol, officer. I'm on my way home from a speaking engagement." Turner didn't seem convinced. He shone his flashlight into her car, the beam lingering on her face longer than necessary. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Michelle hesitated for a fraction of a second before complying. She opened the door slowly, her movements deliberate, and stood beside her car. She was taller than Turner had expected, her presence commanding even in silence. "Hands on the hood," he ordered, his tone hardening. Michelle's heart rate quickened, but she kept her composure. "Officer, is there a problem? I haven't done anything wrong." "I'll be the judge of that," Turner snapped. "Hands on the hood. Now." Michelle placed her hands on the car, her mind racing. She knew her rights, but she also knew how quickly situations like this could escalate. She took a deep breath, her training kicking in. Stay calm. Assess the threat. De-escalate. Turner began patting her down, his hands rough and invasive. Michelle clenched her teeth but said nothing. When he finished, he stepped back, his expression unreadable. "Turn around," he ordered. Michelle turned to face him, her eyes steady. "Officer, I'd like to know why I'm being treated this way. I haven't broken any laws." Turner's jaw tightened. "You're being uncooperative, ma'am. That's reason enough." Michelle's patience was wearing thin, but she kept her voice level. "I'm not being uncooperative. I'm asking for an explanation. That's my right." Turner's face flushed with anger. "You're right? You don't get to question me. Women like you need to learn how to listen." The words hit Michelle like a punch to the gut, but she didn't flinch. She had heard variations of that phrase too many times in her life, but this time, it felt like a line had been crossed. Before she could respond, Turner grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. "You're under arrest for obstruction and assaulting an officer." Michelle's eyes widened in disbelief. "Assaulting an officer? I haven't touched you." Turner ignored her, pulling her toward his cruiser. Michelle's mind raced. She could easily break free. Her training had prepared her for far worse, but she knew that would only make things worse. Instead, she allowed herself to be handcuffed, her body tense but compliant. As Turner shoved her into the back of the cruiser, Michelle's thoughts turned inward. She had faced enemies on the battlefield, but this felt different. This wasn't a foreign threat. This was her own country, her own community. And yet, she felt just as vulnerable. The cruiser pulled away from the curb, the flashing lights reflecting off the darkened streets. Michelle stared out the window, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She thought about her years of service, the sacrifices she had made, and the principles she had fought to uphold. And now, here she was, being treated like a criminal for no reason other than the color of her skin. But Michelle Moore wasn't one to back down. She had faced impossible odds before, and she had always found a way to overcome them. This time would be no different. As the cruiser sped toward the police station, Michelle made a silent vow. She would fight this injustice, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been wronged by a system that was supposed to protect them. At the police station, Michelle was processed with cold efficiency. Her calm exterior masked the storm of emotions brewing inside. She knew the fight ahead would be difficult, but she was ready. After all, she was a Navy SEAL, and Navy SEALs don't quit. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, unflattering glow on the sterile, impersonal room. Michelle sat on a hard plastic chair, her hands resting calmly on her lap, though her mind was anything but still. The cuffs had been removed, but the weight of the situation pressed down on her like a lead blanket. She had been through worse, much worse, but this felt different. This wasn't a battlefield. This was her own country, her own community. And yet, she felt like a stranger in a system that was supposed to protect her. Across the room, Officer Turner leaned against a desk, his arms crossed, his expression smug. He exchanged a few words with another officer, his tone casual, as if this were just another routine arrest. Michelle's jaw tightened, but she kept her face neutral. She knew better than to let her emotions show. In the military, she had learned that composure was a weapon, and she wielded it now with precision. A young man in a slightly rumpled suit entered the room, his briefcase clutched tightly in one hand. He had a nervous energy about him, but his eyes were sharp and determined. He approached Michelle with a tentative smile. "Ms. Moore? I'm Alfred Hill. I'll be representing you." Michelle studied him for a moment. He was young, probably fresh out of law school, but there was something in his demeanor that suggested he wasn't going to back down easily. She nodded. "Thank you for coming." Alfred sat down beside her, setting his briefcase on the floor. "I've reviewed the charges and, well, this is a mess, but we'll get through it. First, I need to hear your side of the story." Michelle took a deep breath and recounted the events of the traffic stop, her voice steady and measured. She described Turner's aggressive behavior, his unfounded accusations, and the way he had manhandled her despite her compliance. Alfred listened intently, jotting down notes and occasionally nodding. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "This isn't going to be easy. Turner has a clean record, on paper at least, and he's already painted you as the aggressor." Michelle's eyes narrowed. "He's lying, and I have no doubt he's done this before." Alfred hesitated, then leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "I've been digging into his background. There are whispers, complaints that were never formally investigated. Excessive force, racial profiling. Nothing concrete, but it's a start." Michelle nodded slowly. "If he's done this to others, there has to be evidence. Witnesses. Something." Alfred's lips curved into a faint smile. "That's what I'm hoping, but we'll need to move carefully. The system isn't exactly kind to people like us." Michelle's gaze hardened. "I'm used to fighting uphill battles. Just tell me what you need from me." Alfred opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "First, we need to build your defense. Your military record will be crucial. It shows discipline, integrity, everything Turner is trying to undermine. But we'll need more than that. We need to expose his pattern of behavior. Michelle leaned forward, her voice low but firm. I'm not just fighting for myself, Alfred. If Turner is abusing his power, he needs to be stopped. For good. Alfred met her gaze, his expression serious. I understand, and I'll do everything I can to make that happen. But it's going to be a fight. Michelle's lips curved into a faint, determined smile. I've been in fights before. I know how to win. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and paperwork. Alfred worked tirelessly, reaching out to potential witnesses and digging deeper into Turner's past. Michelle, meanwhile, focused on staying calm and composed. She knew the trial would be a battle, and she needed to be ready. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived, and the courtroom was packed. Michelle sat at the defense table, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. Alfred was beside her, shuffling through his notes and occasionally glancing at the prosecution's table, where Turner sat with his lawyer, a seasoned attorney with a reputation for winning tough cases. The judge, an older man with a stern expression, called the court to order. The prosecutor stood and began his opening statement, painting Michelle as a volatile individual who had lashed out at a dedicated officer simply doing his job. He emphasized Turner's heroic actions and the danger he had allegedly faced. When it was Alfred's turn, he stood slowly, his movements deliberate. He approached the jury, his voice calm but firm. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you're about to hear is a story of injustice. A story of a woman who served her country with honor, only to be betrayed by the very system she fought to protect. He went on to outline Michelle's military career, her impeccable record, and her commitment to justice. Then he turned his attention to Turner, describing the officer's history of complaints and the lack of accountability within the police department. The jury listened intently, their expressions shifting from skepticism to curiosity. Turner took the stand, his confidence unwavering as he recounted his version of events. He described Michelle as aggressive and uncooperative, claiming she had tried to grab his weapon. But under Alfred's cross-examination, cracks began to appear in his story. Alfred pressed him on the inconsistencies, his questions sharp and precise. Officer Turner, Alfred said, his tone deceptively calm, you claim that Ms. Moore attempted to grab your weapon, yet there's no evidence to support that. No fingerprints on your holster, no witnesses to corroborate your story. Isn't it true that you escalated the situation unnecessarily? Turner's jaw tightened. I was doing my job. She was a threat. Alfred raised an eyebrow. A threat? A woman who served her country for 20 years, with no criminal record, suddenly becomes a threat during a routine traffic stop? That doesn't add up, does it? Turner shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his confidence wavering. The jury took note, their expressions growing more skeptical. As the hearing progressed, Alfred introduced a key piece of evidence, a witness who had recorded part of the traffic stop on their phone. The video was shaky, but the audio was clear. Turner's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, as he ordered Michelle to comply. Her voice, calm but firm, could be heard questioning his actions. The video ended abruptly, but it was enough to cast doubt on Turner's version of events. The prosecutor objected, but the judge allowed the evidence to be admitted. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted, the tension palpable. Michelle remained calm, her expression unreadable, but inside, she felt a flicker of hope. This was just the beginning, but it was a crack in the wall, and cracks could be widened. Alfred returned to the defense table, his expression a mix of relief and determination. We're making progress, he whispered to Michelle. But this is just the first round. Turner isn't going down without a fight. Michelle nodded, her gaze steady. Neither am I. The hearing adjourned, And as Michelle left the courtroom, she felt the weight of the battle ahead. But she also felt something else: resolve. She had faced impossible odds before, and she had always found a way to overcome them. This time would be no different. The system might be against her, but Michelle Moore wasn't one to back down. And she wasn't fighting just for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced by those in power. The days following the preliminary hearing were a whirlwind of preparation and strategy. Alfred worked tirelessly, poring over case files, witness statements, and every piece of evidence they could gather. Michelle, meanwhile, focused on staying grounded. She spent her mornings running through the quiet streets of her neighborhood, the rhythmic pounding of her feet against the pavement helping to clear her mind. She had always found solace in discipline, and now, more than ever, she needed it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alfred arrived at Michelle's modest home, a stack of files tucked under his arm. He knocked lightly on the door, and Michelle greeted him with a nod, stepping aside to let him in. "I think I found something," Alfred said as he settled onto the couch, his excitement barely contained. He opened one of the files and spread the contents across the coffee table. Turner has a history, not just complaints but patterns. Excessive force, racial profiling, intimidation. It's all here. Michelle leaned forward, her eyes scanning the documents. But none of it stuck. He's still on the force. Alfred nodded, his expression grim. Exactly. The system protects its own. But if we can connect the dots, show a pattern of behavior, we might have a chance. Michelle's gaze lingered on a photograph of Turner, his face smug and confident. He thinks he's untouchable. That's his weakness. Alfred looked up at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. There's something else. Your military record. It's impressive, Michelle. But it's more than that. It's a weapon. If we can show the jury who you really are, what you've done, what you've sacrificed, it changes everything. Michelle hesitated, her jaw tightening. I don't want this to be about me. It's not just my fight. Alfred leaned forward, his voice earnest. I get that. But sometimes, to win the bigger battle, you have to use every tool at your disposal. Your story matters. It shows the jury that you're not just some random person Turner decided to target. You're a hero. And heroes don't get treated like this. Michelle exhaled slowly, her mind racing. She had spent her entire career avoiding the spotlight, focusing on the mission rather than the recognition. But Alfred was right. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about exposing the system that allowed men like Turner to thrive. All right, she said finally. We'll use it, but we do it my way. No grandstanding. No theatrics. Just the truth. Alfred nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. The truth is all we need. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. The air was thick with anticipation, the tension palpable. Michelle sat at the defense table, her posture straight, her expression calm but resolute. Alfred was beside her, his notes spread out in front of him, his eyes scanning the room. The prosecution called Turner to the stand first. He took his seat with the same confidence he had displayed during the preliminary hearing, his uniform crisp, his demeanor unshaken. The prosecutor led him through his testimony, painting Michelle as a volatile individual who had posed a threat to public safety. When it was Alfred's turn to cross-examine, he approached the stand slowly, his movements deliberate. He began with simple questions, lulling Turner into a false sense of security. "Officer Turner," Alfred said, his tone calm but firm, "you've testified that Ms. Moore was aggressive and uncooperative during the traffic stop. Is that correct?" Turner nodded. "Yes, that's correct." Alfred tilted his head slightly. "And yet, the video evidence shows her calmly questioning your actions. No raised voice, no physical aggression. How do you explain that?" Turner's jaw tightened. "The video doesn't show everything. She was defiant, challenging my authority." Alfred raised an eyebrow. "Challenging your authority?" "By asking why she was being detained." Turner shifted in his seat, his confidence wavering. "She was being uncooperative. I had to take control of the situation." Alfred nodded as if considering the answer. Then he turned to the jury, his voice rising slightly. "Control. That's an interesting word, isn't it? Because control is exactly what this case is about." Officer Turner didn't see Ms. Moore as a person. He saw her as a threat to his control. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on Alfred. He turned back to Turner, his gaze steady. "Tell me, Officer Turner, have you ever served in the military?" Turner frowned, caught off guard. "No, I haven't." Alfred nodded again. "I see. So you wouldn't know what it's like to put your life on the line for your country. To face real threats, not imagined ones." Turner's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, Alfred continued. "Ms. Moore has. She's a retired Navy SEAL, a lieutenant commander to be exact. She's faced dangers you couldn't begin to imagine, and yet you saw her as a threat. Why is that, Officer Turner?" Turner opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The courtroom was silent, the weight of Alfred's words hanging in the air. Alfred turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Ms. Moore's military record into evidence." The judge nodded, and Alfred handed the documents to the clerk. As the jury reviewed them, their expressions shifted from skepticism to awe. Michelle's record was impeccable, her service distinguished. It was clear that this was no ordinary defendant. When it was Michelle's turn to take the stand, she approached with the same calm confidence she had displayed throughout the trial. She sat down, her posture straight, her gaze steady. Alfred began his questioning gently, allowing Michelle to tell her story in her own words. She spoke of her military career, her dedication to service, and her commitment to justice. Then she recounted the events of the traffic stop, her voice calm but firm. "I wasn't resisting," she said, her eyes sweeping across the courtroom. "I was asking for an explanation. I wanted to know why I was being treated that way. But Officer Turner didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a threat, and that's the problem. When those in power see people like me as threats, justice becomes impossible." The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on Michelle. Even the judge seemed momentarily taken aback by her words. Alfred stepped forward, his voice soft but filled with conviction. "Ms. Moore, you've spent your life serving this country. Do you feel like the system has served you in return?" Michelle hesitated for a moment, then shook her head. "No, but that's why I'm here. Not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever been silenced by those in power. Because justice isn't just a word, it's a promise, and it's a promise worth fighting for." As Michelle stepped down from the stand, the courtroom remained silent, the weight of her words lingering in the air. Alfred returned to the defense table, his expression a mix of pride and determination. The battle was far from over, but they had struck a powerful blow. And Michelle knew, no matter what happened next, she had already won something far more important: the truth. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the trial entered its most critical phase. The prosecution had rested its case, painting Michelle as a volatile individual who had posed a threat to Officer Turner. But Alfred's strategy was clear: dismantle Turner's credibility piece by piece and let the truth speak for itself. The jury, a mix of men and women from diverse backgrounds, watched intently, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Alfred stood at the defense table, his notes spread out in front of him. He glanced at Michelle, who sat beside him, her posture straight, her expression calm but resolute. She had spent the morning preparing for her testimony, her mind focused on the task ahead. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about exposing the system that allowed men like Turner to thrive. "Your Honor," Alfred said, addressing the judge, "the defense calls Lieutenant Commander Michelle Moore to the stand." Michelle rose from her seat, her movements deliberate and controlled. She walked to the witness stand, her navy blazer and crisp white shirt giving her an air of authority. As she took her seat, the room fell silent, every eye fixed on her. Alfred approached the stand, his tone calm but firm. "Ms. Moore, could you please state your full name and occupation for the record?" Michelle leaned slightly toward the microphone, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Michelle Moore. I am a retired lieutenant commander in the United States Navy, where I served as a Navy SEAL for 20 years. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The jury leaned forward, their interest piqued. Alfred nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Can you tell us about your military career?" Michelle's gaze swept across the room as she began to speak. I joined the Navy straight out of high school. Over the years, I worked my way up through the ranks, eventually becoming a lieutenant commander. I led teams on missions in some of the most dangerous parts of the world. My job was to protect my country and uphold the values we stand for. Alfred nodded, his expression serious. And during your service, were you ever in situations where you had to make split-second decisions under extreme pressure? Yes, Michelle replied without hesitation. Many times. In combat zones, there's no room for error. You have to assess the situation, make a decision, and act. But you also have to be accountable for your actions. That's something I've always taken very seriously. Alfred paused, letting her words sink in. Then he shifted his focus to the night of the traffic stop. Ms. Moore, can you tell us what happened on the night you were arrested? Michelle took a deep breath, her eyes steady. I was driving home after giving a speech at a local military base. Officer Turner pulled me over, claiming I was swerving. I wasn't. I handed him my license and registration, but he became aggressive when I asked why I was being detained. He ordered me out of the car, and when I complied, he handcuffed me and accused me of resisting arrest and assaulting him. None of that was true. Alfred nodded, his expression thoughtful. And how did you respond to his actions? I stayed calm, Michelle said, her voice firm. I've been trained to de-escalate situations, not escalate them. I didn't resist. I didn't threaten him. I simply asked for an explanation. But he didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a threat. The courtroom was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Alfred turned to the jury, his voice rising slightly. A threat. That's what Officer Turner saw. Not a decorated veteran. Not a law-abiding citizen. A threat. He turned back to Michelle, his tone softening. Ms. Moore, do you believe Officer Turner's actions were motivated by bias? Michelle hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yes, I believe he saw me as a threat because of who I am, because of the color of my skin. And that's not just my problem. It's a problem for everyone who's ever been treated unfairly by those in power. The jury exchanged glances, their expressions thoughtful. Alfred nodded, his expression serious. Thank you, Ms. Moore. No further questions. The prosecutor rose to his feet, his expression tight. He approached the stand, his tone sharp. Ms. Moore, you claim that Officer Turner acted out of bias. But isn't it possible that he was simply doing his job? That he perceived a threat where none existed? Michelle met his gaze, her eyes steady. If he perceived a threat, it was because he chose to. I wasn't breaking any laws. I wasn't being aggressive. I was simply existing. And for people like me, that's often enough to be seen as a threat. The prosecutor's jaw tightened, but he pressed on. You're a strong woman, Ms. Moore. Isn't it possible that Officer Turner felt intimidated by your physical presence? Michelle's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. I'm not stronger than a trained police officer. And let's be clear, I didn't resist. I didn't threaten him. I simply asked for an explanation. If he felt intimidated, it wasn't because of anything I did. It was because of who he is. The prosecutor opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The courtroom was silent, the weight of Michelle's words pressing down on everyone present. Finally, the prosecutor nodded curtly. No further questions. As Michelle stepped down from the stand, the courtroom remained silent, the tension almost unbearable. Alfred returned to the defense table, his expression a mix of pride and determination. The courtroom was electric with anticipation as the trial entered its final phase. The jury had heard both sides of the story, and now it was time for closing arguments. Michelle sat at the defense table, her posture straight, her expression calm but resolute. Alfred was beside her, his notes spread out in front of him, his eyes scanning the room. The prosecution had done its best to paint Michelle as a threat, but Alfred was confident that the truth would prevail. The prosecutor stood first, his tone measured but lacking its earlier vigor. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this is a case about accountability. Officer Turner was doing his job, making split-second decisions to protect public safety. Mistakes may have been made, but that doesn't change the fact that he was acting in good faith." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the jury. "The defense has worked hard to paint Officer Turner as a villain, but I urge you to consider the broader picture. Law enforcement officers face difficult decisions every day. They don't have the luxury of hindsight. They have to act in the moment, and sometimes mistakes happen." The prosecutor's tone hardened as he finished. "I ask you to consider the facts and not be swayed by emotion or spectacle. Thank you." The courtroom was silent as he returned to his seat. Alfred rose slowly, his movements deliberate. He adjusted his tie, straightened his jacket, and approached the jury with an air of quiet confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice steady and firm, "what we've seen here today is not a complex case. It is, in fact, painfully simple. My client, Lieutenant Commander Michelle Moore, a decorated Navy SEAL and an American hero, was profiled, mistreated, and lied about by a man who abused his power." He turned, gesturing toward Michelle, who sat with her back straight, her hands resting lightly on the table. Michelle Moore did not resist arrest. She did not threaten Officer Turner. What she did was ask a question, a simple, reasonable question. And for that, she was thrown against a car, handcuffed, and humiliated. Alfred's voice rose, his passion filling the room. "This isn't just about Michelle Moore. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that those who wear a badge and swear an oath to protect and serve are held to the highest standards of integrity. Because when they fail to do so, the entire system fails." He took a step closer to the jury, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Today, you have the power to send a message that no one, not even an officer of the law, is above accountability. A message that justice is not just a word we say, but a principle we uphold." Alfred returned to his seat, and the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. The judge gave his final instructions to the jury, and they were dismissed to deliberate. The hours that followed felt like days. Michelle sat in the courthouse hallway, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Alfred paced back and forth, his brow furrowed in thought. The low hum of conversation from nearby spectators and reporters filled the space, but Michelle tuned it all out. She had faced tougher battles before, but this one felt different. This wasn't just about her. It was about something much bigger. Finally, the bailiff appeared in the doorway. "The jury has reached a verdict." The courtroom was packed as everyone filed back in, the tension almost unbearable. Michelle stood beside Alfred at the defense table, her face an unreadable mask. Across the room, Turner sat stiffly, his eyes fixed on the jury box. The foreperson of the jury, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a serious expression, stood as the judge addressed her. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," the foreperson replied, her voice steady. The judge nodded. "Please read the verdict." The foreperson unfolded a piece of paper and began. "In the case of State versus Michelle Moore, we find the defendant not guilty on all charges." A wave of emotion rippled through the room. Gasps, murmurs, and even a few quiet cheers broke out before the judge's gavel brought order. Michelle exhaled softly, her shoulders relaxing. Alfred placed a hand on her shoulder, a smile breaking through his otherwise professional demeanor. The foreperson continued. "Furthermore, we the jury strongly recommend that an investigation into Officer Turner's conduct be pursued." The judge nodded gravely. "The court will take this recommendation under advisement. Officer Turner, I suggest you retain counsel. This matter is far from over." Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward. Michelle stood tall, her presence commanding as she addressed the crowd. "This isn't just my victory," she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "This is a victory for accountability, for justice, and for everyone who has ever been silenced by those in power. I didn't fight this battle alone, and I won't stop fighting for others." Alfred stood beside her, watching with a mixture of pride and admiration. The crowd erupted into applause as Michelle turned and walked away, leaving the cameras behind. Months later, Officer Turner was dismissed from the police force and faced criminal charges for perjury and misconduct. His fellow officers, once loyal to him, distanced themselves as the investigation uncovered more of his abuses. Michelle returned to her quiet life, but her name became a symbol of resilience and justice. She was invited to speak at events, her story inspiring others to stand up against injustice. Though she had left the battlefield years ago, Michelle Moore knew that her fight wasn't over, and she was ready for whatever came next. Because for her, justice wasn't just an outcome, it was a way of life. The fight for justice is never over. Michelle Moore stood her ground, but how many others are still silenced? What would you do if you were in her shoes? Comment below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more powerful tales of resilience and justice.